Can you check Facebook now
I
and see?
think, I think,
Oh, yeah.
are we on?
I don't know.
Is this thing on?
Hey, everybody. I think we might be live. We have had a host of, oh, we are. We have had a host of technical problems. So you might have noticed that in the last, I don't know, year, we have been doing very few Facebook Live coffee chats, which used to be our signature thing we did every single Monday. And we ran into a brick wall of technical problems, but I think we solved them and we're very excited to be back today. Today is not a Monday, which is usually when we have coffee chat. Instead, today is a Wednesday, but who cares? So we wanted to come back and say hello, but also we wanted to talk this week a little bit about a topic that people are discussing online these days, which is moving abroad. So today, I have with me my business partner and friend of 30 years, Andrew Vallone, who is live from Slovenia. Hey, how you doing, Andrew?
I am awesome. I'm so glad this thing worked. So we've cracked the code.
You guys have no idea how long we've been trying to fix this glitch, so it's been really annoying. So we're super, super happy to be able to be back with you guys and doing these interviews again because it was one of the things we always enjoyed doing the most. So today, what we're going to do is Andrew and I would like to talk to you guys a little bit about this trend of people talking about moving to Europe. I think for a lot of people, moving to Europe or anywhere else in the world seems like a fabulous solution to all of your problems. Your problems will magically disappear if you run away to Mexico or Thailand or Spain or something like this. For a lot of people, there is a practical angle to it, which is a lot of folks are looking at retirement programs. The cost of living where I live in Seattle is so high that if I were retired, I couldn't live here. There's no way. So it's understandable that people are starting to look at options for moving to other countries for retirement packages. But now a lot of people, because of the digital nomad option, there are visas available for countries that weren't available before. I mean, COVID really changed the nature of work because you can work from anywhere. I mean, Andrew and I have colleagues that run Adventures with Sarah together that live everywhere. I mean, we have people in Jordan and people in Egypt and people in Thailand, and we're able to all collaborate together. So where we live doesn't really matter anymore. So that's why we thought today would be a very interesting opportunity to talk to you guys a little bit about the pros and cons, the myths of living abroad. How hard is it really to do this? And what does it take? What kind of grit does it take? So Andrew's going to be our first person we'll talk to about this because you're the grittiest of all of them, right, Andrew?
Oh yes, I'm 150% grit, obviously.
Well, but the thing that I kind of admire about your story though is that you basically just kind of made a decision. What it was a long time ago, maybe 15 years ago now, right?
Yeah, almost. I mean, this will be 11 years living here next month. So yeah, and I probably made the decision a couple of years before that. So yeah, almost.
Yeah.
And
You did it
yeah,
before.
yeah, I did that. Yeah, I did this before it was trendy. But to be honest, I think like what you said, like you just like make the decision. Like, I mean, you got to do your homework, but I think that the biggest thing is just like, can you make that decision and not have second doubts? Because kind of like if you do all this move, you can't just go right back and be like, oops, it didn't work out. I'm just gonna go back to my normal life. I mean, it's a big deal. I definitely don't think it's like moving from Seattle to, I don't know, Kansas City or something like that.
Well, just to kind of back up a little bit, Andrew has, I think, what a lot of you dream about as your situation for moving abroad. The one that you have in your fantasy as you're laying in bed at night and dreaming about what your life could be if you left the US and you did something else, or left wherever maybe you aren't based in the US, but if you move somewhere else, because you actually were even on House Hunters International. So that's one of the things that I mean, a lot of people, I love watching that show because it's like, oh, what if I moved to Mexico? What if I moved to Guatemala? What if I moved to Paris? And you get to see what that's like. But you were actually on that show.
That was pretty cool. It's actually a bit of work, but it's funny, Sarah. Like once or twice a year, I get people coming up to me in all different countries, including Slovenia, saying, I know you from some TV show. Did you? Oh yeah, you like got an apartment somewhere." And I was like, "Yeah, House Hunters International." So it was definitely a worthwhile thing to do because it was just a trip. And it's funny, I haven't watched that show now probably in 5 or 6 years. I'm assuming it's still on, but when we agreed to do it, it was like that was like my number one show to watch. I loved it.
Yeah, well, and I think it is fun to dream about, but then I think the practicalities are a little bit what trips me up. I mean, I'm planning probably a move to Europe eventually in the not too distant future, just completely because I've been planning this for about 15, well, actually, no, I've been planning it since I was 20, that I'd like to move to Europe, potentially Italy. And the problem that I think for myself that I get stuck on is how do you even start the process? So Andrew and I were kind of like brainstorming some questions that you might want to ask yourself before you kind of start even thinking about this process. So I think the first question is, how do you pick the right place?
Yeah, I mean, I think it has got to be a place you've been to many times that you get this comfortability kind of comfort feeling in. Like you in Rome. I mean, it's like it's not just that you know it so well, but you probably have friends there now. You have a pretty good idea of how the locals live. And if you go to a place one time and you're like, wow, this is amazing, like it might be nice to visit, but not really nice to live in. I think part of it is that and trying I guess if you're thinking about I want to be an expat, I want to move abroad, it's almost like the next time you go somewhere, try looking at it not as the normal tourist traveler visiting, looking at it as the practicality thing of all these things like what people are doing and whatever the transport system just like try to get in more like here's what the daily life is because if you move there you won't be the tourist traveler anymore, you're going to just be like you are in Seattle, you're like I just live here.
Well, yeah, and I think one of the primary considerations on picking where you want to live is how much of a lifestyle change are you willing to make? Because the thing is, I live in a big house, I drive a big car, I go to Costco, I do my grocery shopping. I have certain patterns of life here in Seattle that I simply couldn't have if I moved to Italy, for example, or they'd be not exactly the same. So, what differences in lifestyle patterns have you noticed between the US and living in Slovenia?
Well, definitely some of it is for sure like the place you live in, the size of it. And I mean, just right away, I mean, probably most people watching this, they own something. And if you move abroad, it's like before you know that that's really your place, do you want to commit and do that? So you're probably going to be renting a place. And so you're probably going to be like have a apartment lifestyle, which there's like and it probably all depends. Different cities have different kind of lifestyles, but some of it's that do you even need a car? I mean, I mean, I know Seattle, you need a car there, but a lot of places you don't, which in some ways is kind of cool because you're like, hey, I don't need to be paying all this money on the car. Um, some of it is I mean really I think one of the big things is just the people you're used to seeing and interacting with like you're not guaranteed that you're just going to have this new community waiting for you, and I think that's one of those things like you just don't know, you can't know that until you go there. I mean, granted, there's all these internations and expat groups and things like that, it's easier and easier, but I think some of that is just like are you kind of brave enough to like take that plunge?
Yeah, I mean it's a really big plunge. I think the question, am I moving to the right place is the first thing that you need to ask yourself. I think for myself, and I'm already kind of doing this, the best way to figure that out is make yourself a list. And then you're going to have to dedicate the time to actually going and staying in those places. So even if it's a week or two, maybe plan out, take a month off of work or something like that if you can, and go and live and eat in each place for a week, for example. I mean, that's maybe not even enough, but Andrew is absolutely correct. You would not want to just up and go buy yourself a house because you have no idea if that place is really going to speak to you because you don't live there. So that would probably be the first thing is maybe try to temporarily go and visit several places that you have an interest in and just see if it fits you. Is that kind of what you did?
I think when I knew I was going to move abroad, I was like, well, I'm going to live somewhere in Slovenia, or like there was like Zagreb in Croatia, or this Istria region in Croatia. Like they were close by to Slovenia. I knew them enough. I had a few friends there. But like everywhere else is like, okay, like, hey, nice to visit, and maybe I'll move there could move there later. But it's like I kind of like go with what you know, and I knew Slovenia so well because I'd spent enough time there. But I think the shopping list is a great idea. Like not only find like, hey, 3 or 4 places that you want to go investigate, but have your list of like, here's things that I really want, or here are things that I really need, or hey, if I'm going to live here, what is the public transport, or the this or the that, or if you've got kids, I mean, hey, I mean, I moved here with little kids, so part of that could be the school system. But going there with like, here's this list, and what do each of these, can how many boxes get checked off there? And it's like the pros and cons. And even for me, it was just like where I'm going to live in Slovenia. It was just pros and cons. And I think one thing is like when we travel, we're usually in the city center, wherever we're at. And like that's not necessarily the most realistic thing, especially if you're in Europe and you want to have a car because there's not a whole lot of parking in the city center. And guess where the prices are the highest for everything, for rent, for food, for like, I mean, if you or I lived in Rome, like I can't even imagine how much money I'd want to spend every day just eating and drinking everywhere. So that's why I moved out kind of more to the boonies where it's like, well, there's nothing to spend my money on here. So, you got to be practical too.
Exactly. And I've been discussing this a lot with my partner who's from the Netherlands, and we're kind of trying to decide where do we want to start looking at to live. And, especially when you're moving with somebody else. Maybe if you're by yourself, you can kind of do whatever you want. But, between the two of us, what we've kind of come up with is that he's from the Netherlands. So it would make sense to look there because that's where his family is. He speaks the language. I don't speak the language, but I'm very versatile and very flexible, and I can learn a new language and new culture and make new friends because that's been my lifestyle. That's probably not been your lifestyle. And most people don't live the way I do. So first
Yeah.
of all, like if you're going to a place that you're not super familiar with, are you flexible enough to fit like a puzzle piece into their lifestyle? The other option we've talked about is moving to Italy because I have lots of friends in Italy. In fact, most of my friends are in Italy. I'm super comfortable in Rome. I know it super well. I even know what neighborhood I'd like to live in, but it's a different lifestyle. And my partner doesn't speak any Italian. He doesn't have any friends in Italy at all. So then he's having to make the sacrifice. And then we thought, well, what about a third place? So we've been thinking about France, which would be really great for me for work. And I love France, but neither of us speaks fluent Italian or fluent French. I speak Italian and he speaks Dutch and German. So it's kind of like we have a lot of languages between the two of us, but French is not one of them. So
This is sounding like a House Hunter episode already. You're like, are we picking Netherlands, Italy, or France? And then,
I know, and it really is. And I mean, just starting off by what country are you going to go to? We can't even start looking at regions or cities or deciding are we city or country because we can't even figure out what country we want to be in. It could even be that like our number one goal is to be in a place that's not this gray. I live in the rain. It's freezing and raining today. It snowed in places around Seattle yesterday, and I can't take it anymore. I want to be somewhere tropical. Honestly, Thailand would be a great option, except for that Thailand is very, very hard to get to anywhere else outside. I mean, Southeast
yeah.
Asia is so away from everything else. And in Europe, they still have winter. There's not really any place in Europe you can go where you don't have winter. I mean, Egypt, I guess. I don't know. That's not really Europe. But so this is the problem is that there are so many competing things that just picking a country for me is the number one hardest thing. I think Sicily looks good to me because I have lots and lots of friends there. They have a really good balance of weather and price point and all of that. But the problem with Sicily is, again, my partner has no experience there. He doesn't speak Italian. He doesn't have any friends in Sicily. So I'm like, okay, well, I'm putting you in a situation where I have a huge advantage because I'm already comfortable there. I've been in Sicily for a long, long time and I'm really connected to the culture there. So that's really, I think, part of the question if you are thinking about doing this is, especially if you have a partner, what is the compromise? How do you pick a country? So that kind of moves me on to sort of the next thing, because a deciding factor for you when you're making these lists of qualities and thoughts and how you want to approach this, what countries are available to you? Because for me, I'm an EU citizen, as is my partner. We both are EU citizens. We can live anywhere in the European Union. I mean, we could easily move to Ireland. I've got tons of family in Ireland, for example. So we have lots of options, but Americans just simply cannot waltz into Mordor, right? They have to kind of like They have to go through a process. And so that might be a deciding factor for you based on, what are the visas available? Certain countries have these retirement visas, or they give out visas based on how much money you have in the bank. So that's where I want you to take over and tell us your story, because you didn't have big money. You
No.
just did it through insisting your way into Slovenia.
Exactly. It's like you are letting me into your country because
Yeah.
I was like, my job is only to bring Americans so they could spend all their money in your country. Like, come on, like, can I get a free? And that's the thing, you kind of think logically like that. They're like, yeah, no, it doesn't work like that. Because here's the thing, and like this is one of those things about the EU, you and I know, Sarah, that some people don't know. It's not like, well, we're all in the EU, so they all have the same rules for immigration or same rules for anything. They don't. So every country is different. And some of those rules, even in Slovenia, is like, oh, I was told like a year after I got here, oh, it's a good thing you got here when you did, because otherwise you'd have to come first and live here for a year before your like wife and kids can come here. And I was like, well, I probably wouldn't have come here if like they were like having to wait outside for a year. So the biggest thing I think for the average American who doesn't have the Irish passport like you do is when you're serious about a place, one, you can look at expat forums because you're always going to find, let's say, American expat, so you can find out what how difficult it is. The other
Facebook,
thing,
start looking
yeah,
for that.
yeah. And there's expat forums and whatever, there's internations and there's things. Because sometimes it's good not just to get the technical stuff like here's what you need and we allow these kind of golden visas if you best, but you really want like the real person story. Like if someone says, I'm going to move to Slovenia, they could read the requirements, but if they talk to me, they'd get a better idea of what you need to do. But that said, when you're let's say more serious about a specific place, then it's time to either find a relocation company or an attorney because, you don't want if there's so much bureaucracy in Slovenia is not even the king of bureaucracy, and there's a lot here. So there's a lot of things that most Americans aren't used to dealing with because they've never dealt with them, even immigration in the US. So I think like you need that expert because it's such a huge, I mean, it's such a huge leap. But yet you got to do you can do a lot of research now online. And like you said, there's digital visas that might work for some people. I get articles from this American who lives in Romania, and he just wrote a piece today on here's how to get your 1 or 2 year temporary residency in Romania, and I'm looking at that, trying to compare it with Slovenia. And in some ways, like, oh, this is easier, this is better. And it's like, but it's very, very different than what I went through. So it's like every place is different. So it's kind of like I think you could start with like, hey, are there digital nomad stuff, or they're like kind of golden parish? What are the golden visas where you invest?
Golden visas, yeah.
Yeah,
Where
golden
you
visa.
either are retiring or you put $50,000 into a bank account. So the problem is we don't have an easy answer for you. Not every country in Europe has the same rules. And there are tons of countries outside of Europe that are also looking for people to retire or to move there. I mean, Southeast Asia is a great example. They would be happy to host you, but you're going to have to go through and figure out what all of those different rules and regulations are. I would love to do a deep dive on this if we have a lot of time. Maybe we can get my assistant to do that. I don't know, but it's really hard to figure out where to start. So I think probably the first thing for you to ask yourself is, what do you want? What country would really speak to you? And then look into it and kind of make a list of countries and then go through step by step and see what their requirements for residency are. Also, yesterday, as you probably noticed, I posted about getting a EU passport based on your ancestry. Now, generally, it kind of has to be a parent if you want to get a passport. But I do want to warn you, anybody who read that, the one thing I didn't mention, it's not cheap. It's not cheap, and it's not, let's say, quick. Like even if you have like a grandparent from Ireland, like my kids, it's going to take us probably at least a year to get through all the paperwork, and you have to have original documentation for all kinds of things that you've never even thought about. I had to get my passport, my Irish passport. I had to call the church my parents got married at in 1968 and see if I could get an original certified copy of their marriage certificate, which doesn't sound hard, except for most churches don't even know how to get you that information. So
Mm.
it's harder than you think. But if you're tenacious, and it could be worth it, but please be realistic about the fact that it's expensive. And one thing I wanted to clarify with Ireland in particular, ask me, many people ask, can you do it if you have a great grandparent? Yes, and also no. They don't give it to you if you have a great grandparent who emigrated from Ireland, and was born originally in Ireland. You also have to live there. So you have to move there first, live there for a while, and then you can pursue the passport route. But the thing is, he's not an EU citizen. He doesn't have citizenship. So what are the pluses and minuses, Andrew, from your point of view of being a permanent resident? Because you have the permanent residency card.
I have a permanent.
How did you get that?
Well, Slovenia, a lot of countries are similar to Slovenia. I know that, which is actually kind of, I think, how it is in the US too with green cards. If you're here for 5 years, so like in Slovenia, it was like at first temporary residency was good for 1 year, and then another year, and then it was like, oh, now we'll give it for you for 2 years, and after 5 years, you're eligible to apply for this permanent residency. And it took 8 years, although I didn't apply like immediately on the fifth year. Well, that was COVID, and yeah, that was a complete mess. Um, but but like for me, like Slovenia, people say, hey, like, are you a citizen of both countries now? It's like, well, Slovenia doesn't allow dual citizenship, so that isn't even on the table for me if I wanted it. But like a permanent residency thing. It's kind of like if you're an American, if you're in the US and you have a green card, it's like the only things you can't do, you can't vote in the national elections, you can't hold political office, and you can't join the military. So I was like, yeah, I don't think I'm missing out too much on those things. But it actually does allow me to vote in local elections, which I was kind of surprised about. But that's cool. So I get to vote for the mayor of Koper whenever, like later this year, if I want. And what's nice, Sarah, is it is one of those things like now when I travel, when I come back, when I come in and out of Schengen, no one wants to stamp my passport. No one, they just see that permanent residency card. They're like, yeah, yeah, yeah. It's like you're good. And that's powerful. It does kind of give you almost like, hey, I could kind of live anywhere in Europe that I want to. I mean, some countries might say, hey, you need to register here and do this or that. But with the open borders of Schengen, it's almost like, yeah, I'm just going to move to Romania for a year. It's probably not going to be an issue because I'm not overstaying anything really. So the permanent residency card is one of those things that if you're an American, that's probably the best case scenario that you could, if especially if you like living in Europe, you get one of those because that gives you pretty much everything you need. Getting a passport, like you said, Sarah, it's difficult, and that's a whole other longer process because then you actually need documents from churches and grandmas and birth certificates and like holy crap, yeah, that's time and money.
Yeah, it was even for me, I was already a citizen. I was registered at birth. So I was already a citizen, but it still took
Yeah.
me a good couple weeks. And then I had to get a cleric, a priest to to document it and
To
certify my
bless it.
some weird things you got to do. And then for my kids, it's going to be the process of actually applying for citizenship. And then we have to do the passport thing. So it's a lot of time and a lot of effort. But the thing, like I just mentioned, you don't actually need to get a passport to be able to move to Europe. So that's number one, I think, on the list is look for a country that is going to allow you to come as a resident for X amount of time, for a 1 year visa, a 2 year visa, which might actually be enough time for you to decide if that works for you or not. So I guess then the next question I have, Andrew, there's so many questions, and I know that we probably should have multiple sessions to kind of explain how you did it and that sort of thing. But the next question is, how did you physically move there? How did you get your stuff from one place to another? Did you sell everything and start over?
Yeah,
Did
that's one of the yeah that was one of those things. You're like, you look, well, I mean, I looked at just shipping prices, and that was whatever 12 years ago, and I was like, holy smokes. Yeah, and then I remembered like, yeah, everything that you need in Europe, they have like anything you need you could just buy in Europe other than your really personal effects. So yeah, I mean, it was really, I think we moved with 7 or 8 suitcases of check through luggage. So everything that came here from Seattle was contained in 8 suitcases, and that was that. And then it was, yeah, Goodwill and yard sales and giving away, or hey, 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 mom, hey, brother, can you have this one box of a bunch of mementos that I don't want to lose, but there's no way I want to bring it with me to Europe? Can you just put that in the basement so maybe in 20 years from now I can go through it or something? I mean, and the thing is, and this is the thing that people will find out is, Sarah, is it's not all orderly, so you know in advance. It's not like you'll know like, hey, in 6 months I'm getting this. You're kind of waiting around for all this stuff. So when you do finally get your residency, it's kind of like, okay, for us it was like, okay, we better move there sooner rather than later. And and then it's like, okay, everything must go. It's one of those like everything must go sale kind of things. So I mean, you can't like I looked at actually shipping a car over, and that was, I don't know, maybe like $1,500. Of course, I live next to a port, so it helped that like I can do that. Now, realistically, you probably don't want to do that because we've already had a discussion about cars. But one thing I thought about was like, oh, I've got like a nice size Subaru. I could put a ton of stuff in there, so I could ship stuff over. No,
No, you can't do
no,
that. That's illegal.
that's a
Sorry.
yeah. We see. I'm glad I didn't spend the 1,500 to have a crappy Subaru
No,
in Pennsylvania.
no. Dawn, our business manager, she's shipped a car several times because she's moved for the military to multiple
Yeah,
countries. You can't, and
yeah,
it's super, super strict. So moving a car doesn't really make any sense. And also, a lot of countries have different emission standards and things like that. So
yeah.
actually getting your American car registered, it probably doesn't have even enough gas mileage because a lot of these European countries
Yeah.
require certain emission standards and gas standards that our cars are not going to meet.
And
So
then you're on miles instead of kilometers and whatever. So I mean, there if you get a relocation agency that they can do the kind of all the legal stuff, the paperwork stuff, they can help with the move stuff and finding a place to live, all that things. So though that like the relocation places are kind of one-stop shopping. And but at the end of the day, I think it's time to, I mean, put it this way, if you're ready to take that plunge, I think you're ready to downsize. And I think like you're gonna downsize a lot.
yeah, so probably for people who are seriously thinking about doing this, the strategy would probably be get rid of most of the things you own, the things you can't part with, put into storage, bringing furniture over, okay, but it's going to be super expensive. It'll probably be cheaper just to buy new stuff. So unless it's something you absolutely love, that's just kind of the problem is you'll basically be starting over in a lot of ways. And I think that's been what I've heard from most people that I know that have moved abroad, unless you are being moved by a company or you're being moved by the military or something like that.
Yeah, and I mean you got IKEAs everywhere now, so I mean there's not a shortage of finding stuff. In Slovenia, it seems like almost all the apartments or houses I looked at were furnished. I think it's different in different countries. Something like Germany, like you have to provide your own stuff in the kitchen, like they don't even have a refrigerator. I've heard weird stuff. Yeah, so it's just like that's one other thing. Like do that because if you're like, well, I'm when it says furnished, what does furnished mean? It probably means different things in different places.
Yeah, and a couple of different ways you can approach this as you're putting your toes into the water is you might want to just store everything you own and then get like an executive rental, which I know there's a lot of companies that offer a completely fully furnished thing, but and they'll do it by the six months, for example. So you get completely everything done. Because that's a really good point, particularly for Italy. If you rent a place, there's nothing in it. And when I say nothing, I mean they don't have light fixtures in there, like not even like ceiling light fixtures. They don't have a kitchen. You have to buy the kitchen cabinetry and the appliances to go in the kitchen, the sink, everything, everything. There's nothing in there. And so that's a really important point to consider is that when you rent something unfurnished, it will literally be unfurnished. One of my friends moved into a house in Italy, a rental house. They even had to put in like electrical sockets because somebody taken all the plates and switched. So like seriously, it's kind of an ordeal. So before you're ready to make that leap, maybe starting off with a furnished place just to kind of test it out might be the best bet, don't you think?
Oh yeah, yeah, because you might not even know where to go to look for all this stuff. And then, hey, do they deliver or do I need to like have a car, which I don't have? And you don't like your friend that had that truck that always helped you move, like he doesn't live there anymore. So like you got to figure it out on your own.
Yeah. So you talked about relocation agencies. Did you use a relocation agent?
I used a relocation agency. Yeah, and in fact, that's how I got on House Hunters International because House Hunter International contacts the relocation agencies and be like, "Hey, do you have any interesting like clients or whatever?" They're like, "Well, we got some young family moving over here," and they're like, "Okay, see if they want to come on." So like that, if you want to help relocating and maybe getting a slot on the House Hunters International, then maybe hiring one of those companies. It just like they kind of had the attorney package there that would help with all the document stuff. And that's what they did. I mean, they relocated people. Like they just knew, they probably knew even more than even, let's say, some attorney who would be in that field. And plus they had all these other things, like helping you with, whether buying or renting and other things as well. So that's the way to go. And I'm guessing maybe back then there weren't as many expat forums as there are now to get all that information. But I trusted them and it worked out really well. And it was not some crazy price. I mean, just remember, like, you do, if you pay attorney fees in Europe, they're usually going to be less than they are in the States. So
Yeah, well, and also just as an FYI, House Hunters International is a little bit rigged, maybe is the right word, where they
well,
actually, you already
yeah,
had chosen your
yeah,
house and then made it look like it was some sort of like decision or something like that.
yeah. Well, that's why it's called reality TV, not like actuality TV, because it's, yeah. But then you learn the whole secret behind all that stuff. So it's worth a shot, and you get paid. Well, I got paid I think $1,500. So you get a little bit of money and a little bit of notoriety. So you decide if it's worth it.
Yeah. So for those of you just joining us, Andrew is here with me today, and we are discussing moving away. If you are ready to pack it in and move to another country, and what are the pros and cons, and how do you physically do it? Because for me, even though I would like to do it, I've been thinking about it since I was 20 years old, I get stuck on the barrier of the task list and how much the logistical part of it just seems very, very overwhelming. So like we're just kind of talking about, is it worth it? Like what are the pros and cons and how do you actually do it? So we're kind of going through some questions. So we've talked about moving to the right place. We've talked about what are the practicalities of actually moving to a place and how do you identify a country that will let you move there? And so how can you, once you're there, I guess another question is, what are you going to do? Like,
Yeah.
what are you doing with your time? I mean, if you're retired, okay, you're retired, but even if you're retired, what are you doing to occupy your time? Because one of the sacrifices you're going to make if you move to a foreign country is you're not going to be around your friend group. You're not going to be around your family, most likely. So what are you doing to occupy your time? And how do you make friends? That's a big
Yeah.
question.
I think that's like that's one of those things that's hard to know really in advance, because some of it's like, hey, am I the personality that makes friends? But then it's like different countries are, let's say for instance, like being very frank, like Slovenia's, you've been here. It's like people are nice, they're friendly. It's not like no one wants to talk to you, but everyone is very, for national holidays and other stuff, everyone's always wants to just be with their family. Like I always tell people, if some new person comes to Seattle, I worked at Amazon, they're gonna get so many invites for the 4th of July barbecue for sure. And here it's like, yeah, no, sorry, I'm just hanging out with my family. So, it's just, that's just a societal difference. Yeah, you've got these expat forums, but what if you move to a place, like you might move more to countryside? Well, there's probably not a lot of expats in some beautiful little, countryside town in France if you move there. So all of a sudden, like you don't have that network. And then you've got maybe language barriers, things like that. I think one thing for us that was like made it easier was having little kids, because our little kids just went to the school, and then then you're meeting all the other parents of the little kids there, and that was like kind of like an icebreaker, because we moved to this kind of small village basically outside of a town, but everyone knew we had kids, and so our kids were the same age, and that was like that was easy. When I moved to Coper, it's like that went away, and I kind of noticed like, oh, I don't have the friends network here like I did there. And it's not it's and like, again, I think it's like if you're retired, like you probably have your retired friends, but they're not coming with. And that is really a thing, Sarah, is just all the friends and family stuff. Like if you travel a lot, maybe you get used to it, or if you travel back and forth to the States. But otherwise, that can be a really big sacrifice, especially people who are really tight, that have kind of a larger family, because you'd like to think, oh, they'll come and see me all the time, but it's totally it's just not realistic. And at the end of the day, I think if you decide to move abroad, that you've got to be patient on the friends things because you're a fish out of water. There could be language barriers or other things, and you kind of need some friends to get more friends. But how do you get those first few friends? And that's I think that's the toughest thing. You're just like you got to get a few, and then maybe you'll get their friends, and whatever. After a while, it all clicks, but it takes time.
My observation after being in Italy on and off for whatever, 30 years is that the easiest people to make friends with are other expats. You know, most of the
Yeah.
people that I'm really good friends with in Italy are people who are Americans who live in Italy because you have that in common. And honestly, the expat communities are so fun because it's a real choice to move to a different country. Like, and that spirit and that kind of quality that you all share of being gutsy enough to do that, that really does make you connect in some way. So I love American expats. I get along with them really well. I do have Italian friends as well. I have quite a few Italian friends, but I'll tell you, real Italian friends, it's really hard because, yeah, they'll be acquaintances with you, but they would never call you a friend until you've been like in acquaintance for 10 years. I mean, there are plenty of people that I've known for many years that I didn't feel like I could call them a friend until 10 years in, and people won't automatically invite you to their house. They won't. They already have their friend groups too that they've been with since they were born. So a lot of European communities in particular, and I mean, I think in the US to some extent, but much more in Europe. I feel like local communities are much more insular and it's hard to
Mhm.
get into that, especially if you don't speak the language. So, that's another barrier that you have to consider is, am I willing to learn another language? Because in my opinion, I think you kind of have that just comes with the territory. You cannot move to a country and just be like, I'll get by in English. I don't think you're going to make friends that way, right?
Well, I'm lucky because I made some friends in those English in those the Slovenian classes, with a lot of people who were not from Slovenia. But yeah, I mean my language skills. Well, that's the thing when you move to a country that does have such good English, like my bad Slovenia gets like, yeah, we don't want to speak Slovenian to you because we don't want to hear you speak it badly. So they switch to English. But that's like a rare thing. I mean, other unless obviously you move to like the UK or something. So knowing the language and that's a one thing actually where you meet people at. When you take a language class, you're meeting all the other immigrants. And that's puts things in perspective too, because then you realize you're like, oh wow, okay, I moved here with a lot. Like I had a lot. I have a nice safety net and all that. And there's a lot of people who are like, man, I moved here from like three countries south of us and there's nothing there and I need to make it here. But I think you're right about the expat thing because that is one nice thing is you can make friends because you have that immediate thing. You're expats, and you all chose whatever city you're living in, and then you get to meet people from all over the place, and you kind of network through them, and that's a lot easier than networking through locals.
Yeah, I think that that's a really great way to make friends. And like you said, a lot of expats are looking for other friends. Like, for example, I'm a part of an expat group in Rome. And I just, every time I'm in Rome, I just like look through their listings and see what's going on. And there's always going to be events and things like that. And that also might help you determine where you're going to go. Because if having friends and a social life is important to you, living in the country is going to be a lot harder because people in the countryside, if it's a non-English speaking country, fewer people will speak English. They're going to be probably a little bit more insular. Not to say it's not possible. I know lots of people that have moved to little Italian villages or French villages, and they have been able to make some friends. But I think a lot of times, particularly in Italy, I can say, in the smaller towns, people are going to look on you with some suspicion. And they're not really going to be convinced you're going to be around. So you have to kind of be very tenacious about trying to pursue relationships with people, right?
Yeah, and when you're in a bigger city, you kind of blend in anyway because people don't know that you live there as an expat. You're just like, oh, here's some English speaking tourist or traveler or whatever. So it's kind of easier to blend in, and it's easier to make friends. Yeah, I mean, there was a couple little places in Slovenia before I decided to move here. I thought, oh, if I ever move here, I'd like to live there. And I'm thinking, if I moved my kids there, they would have just killed me on the spot. They're like, no, we actually want to live next to a town, or we want to live next to the seaside. Like we don't, and it's true. It's like what's going on in these small places. I mean, I spent all my life in two big cities in the U.S., so I like to visit the small places, and that's the thing. I think you find the home base because you can still you have more time and more resources to go visit all those other places you like, but you got to live in the place that's convenient for you. You know, it like air where are the airports, where are the you know whatever. So yeah, I think the countryside stuff is like that's great for some kind of fantasy romance novel, but not in real life, not so much.
Yeah, no, I would kind of agree with that. I mean, the best thing that I've been able to come up with because is that the idea that I would like to have a small apartment in a city that I would live in principally, and then maybe like a cottage somewhere in the countryside where I could go and I could like have a garden and things like that. But this is the really big question, right? Because the other question is driving, right? Because do you have a Slovenian driver's license now?
I don't, but yeah, I mean, you can get one, and then you got to take the test and all that stuff, and it's you know, it's paperwork and it's all that. And you know, you probably you know, you'll definitely be driving with someone when you're getting you know when they're teaching you, who's going to only speak Slovenian or only speak Italian or whatever.
Yeah,
So
and
yeah,
they actually, there's no reciprocity, first of all, for you for American driver's licenses. I really wish they did, and they actually should consider doing that. But the other problem is most countries, if you like Italy, for example, once you have a residency permit there, you may not drive with your American driver's
mm.
license.
Yeah,
You
and those
can,
are the things you gotta like you gotta check into because like and that's the thing in Europe everyone's different. You're like you start talking about whatever it is, and it's like oh yeah, but you live in like two neighboring countries away from me, and it can be completely different than it is where I'm at. Um,
yeah, so that's a really big deal. If I mean, I think for me that would be a really big deciding factor. If I have my American driver's license, can I continue to use that in Europe? Am I obliged to get the local one? And is that even a realistic option? Do I have to learn to speak the language fluently to be able to take their driver's test? Because that's true in Italy. You have to be able to speak Italian fluently to be able to even take their driver's test because it's not available in other languages. So this is kind of the stuff that you have to think about. Like, I didn't realize that. I didn't realize that driving is maybe not going to be practical for me. That means in certain countries, I'm really just limited to cities because I'm going to be kind of stuck that way, you know? So, and in some ways, a car is not important, right? And if you're thinking about Europe in particular, a car may not actually be important for you because there's such good public transportation, but not in every country, right?
yeah,
The public transportation is not best, I think.
yeah, I mean, it depends where you live. I mean, if I lived in Ljubljana, the capital, is like, well, great. Like I got trains and buses and whatever, and ride shares and all sorts of stuff. But when you don't live there, you know, everything you know drops off. And so places that are close by, it's like, well, it's really close by, but if you don't have a car, it's you know, like there's not a bus that goes there, or it goes like twice a day. So yeah, those are things like I think, and I think most Americans seem hesitant to drive in Europe, regardless of whether or not what license they have. And, you know, rightfully so. If you've driven in a lot of places, it can be confusing and you don't know all the signs and stuff like that. So you really want to, you know, like I think that'd be another advantage. Like I'm going to move to a bigger place that has the infrastructure that has you know, taxis or Uber. Or like for example, like Uber doesn't exist in Slovenia. There's no app I can get to just call me a cab like you can in so many places. So like now to me that's a downside, but okay, I can get by with it. But if I'm living in a bigger city and there's not that, it's like, okay, well, you know, put that on your cons list for that place.
Well, yeah, and I actually have found that the driving part is kind of problematic, just also from the point of view that not every country, I'm just speaking about Europe, but not every country in Europe has the same driving patterns and traditions. And I know this because, like, just as an example, I spend time in the Netherlands now, but I've been driving in Italy for 30 years. I understand how to drive in Italy. I know how to anticipate what people are going to do. I understand the common courtesy of the road because it's just programmed into my brain. You know, put me in a Fiat Cinquecento in Sicily, I'm fine. You know, I know how to follow the flow of traffic, what to expect. I don't like driving in the Netherlands at all. I don't like it at all because completely different anticipation and completely different yielding rules even like people who are taking a left in front of you sometimes have the right of way on a thoroughfare and I'm like what.
Yeah, That's
The
crazy.
right
Yeah.
way makes my head explode and it terrifies me to get on the road because I don't really understand it. So this is, we're getting a little bit in the weeds here about driving, but this is something that I think is really important, especially to Americans, is we love our cars. We love having a car. We love the freedom to do whatever we want whenever we want. And if that's important to you, you need to think about a lot of different things. Like you need to choose a country that's going to be easy to get a driver's license, and you're going to need to pick a city or a town where you can have a place to park your car. I
Mhm.
mean, I remember you and Coper having that car because you lived in the center. You had to like park your car a 15-minute hike outside of town in like a vacant lot.
Yeah, it's like there's like that when the Venetians built that city, they didn't have they weren't thinking about cars back then. So that's the thing. And the other thing for Americans who like cars is like just check the petrol prices because and I mean once you convert the dollars and euros and liters and gallons and stuff like that, it's like yeah, it's a little bit more expensive over here. So
Well, yeah, and owning a car generally is a lot more expensive. And it's not just the gas prices, because honestly, like the cars there are so much more efficient that I have found in
that's
all the
yeah.
cars, it kind of breaks even because yeah, okay, the gas is more expensive, but your car is going to use a quarter of what the gas of the same model car would use here, which is actually true. Look that statistic up. But the
Wow.
thing about it is that the other piece you don't know is every country has a different licensing fee. For example, the Netherlands, I know, has like a subscription fee you have to pay on a car every year, and that tax is outrageous. And it's like
Mhm.
an insane amount of money to have one car. And so like you would not have two cars between two people in the Netherlands. That would be completely, bonkers. So something to consider. I know we love our cars. We're used to having our cars and our freedom, particularly if you're a Gen Xer or older, you love your driver's license. But that's going to be something that's a lifestyle change that I don't know if you're prepared for. So just to shift gears a little bit, the other question that we get, and by the way, for those of you watching, if you just tuned in, we're talking about what do you think about moving abroad? Is that all that, or is it scary or hard or easy? Like, what are the pros and cons? And Andrew is here with me, who has lived in Slovenia for about 15 years. The biggest question, and you guys can ask me questions in the comments if you want. I'm taking a look at those. Health insurance. Tell me all about health insurance, because I think that's one of the scariest pieces of moving abroad. How does that work?
So in Slovenia, and I'd say I think it's probably representative of most of Europe. Otto probably knows about the Netherlands. Is so you're either employed by someone and you must have health insurance. Like you can't get a job here and there's no job. They can't give you a job and not give you health insurance. So if you get hired by some local company, great, you got health insurance. Or you're self-employed. I have my own business, and then you're paying for that every month. Um, and so you can't like you have to have something. You can't, which is good because, let's face it, we know how many problems there are in the US because people don't have insurance. So in some ways it's kind of easy because it's like, well, if you're employed by someone, great, it's taken care of. If not, it's fairly easy to get the things set up. And I pay, what do I pay for four people? I pay, I don't know, 450, 500 euros a month, something like that. And again, okay, so this is, there's public health care here, and there's private, and there's like places that are mixed, that are like part private, part public. So for some things, you're really glad that you have public health insurance. For other things, when you don't want to wait 6 months, then you kind of jump the queue and go to the place that has offering the private stuff. I haven't been in the States in a long time, but still, like having private care here is still much, much cheaper than you'd be paying for in the States. So that part I think is relatively easy, but it's one of those things like you must have health insurance. If you don't have, I mean, it's just kind of you have to have it. I guess when you first move here, if you're not already employed and before everything gets set up, you probably, I guess, you'd want to have some kind of health insurance as like from your travel insurance when you get here before things get set up. But that part is fairly straightforward, so it's not a big deal. But the bigger deal is just like, okay, well, how long am I going to wait for this? And it all depends again where you live, and that's a good thing. The expat community, Sarah, you need to talk to the people and be like, okay, I need this surgery, my kids need this dental thing. They probably say, oh, here's where you need to go because they already know. Because you can be in one place and the place in your city isn't great, but 10 kilometers away, there's a place where you can still go and use the same insurance and you don't have to wait for 6 months. So that's kind of one of those expat, like, like kind of help you out type of things.
Yeah, and I found in my travels as well, because working with a lot of guests who have, medical emergencies and things like that, there are in larger cities English speaking doctors, and that's
Yep.
another consideration for you to think about, because I speak fluent Italian. I would never go to an Italian speaking GP that did not speak any English, because I've had to translate medical conversations before for my clients, and I don't like doing it because it's way too easy to misunderstand things. And that's the one place you don't want to
Yeah.
misunderstand. The difference between, is it a wart, is it cancerous? I don't want to misunderstand what they're actually saying to me. So that's a really big consideration. You probably want to look at living someplace that has a bigger hospital nearby that's going to have people that speak English. And in fact, like years ago, I was thinking about, Sicily, and maybe potentially looking at moving there. And one of my girlfriends in Sicily said, don't. You have, a medical history that is going to require, could potentially require, having specialists or whatever. You definitely shouldn't be in Sicily, because the people in Sicily, they have good care there and stuff like that, but it's not the same quality as Rome, for example, and you're not going to find English speaking doctors. So that's really something important to think about. Are you going to have access to English speaking doctors, dentists, opticians, the things that you need if you don't speak the local language, right?
Yeah, and I think that's probably again really like, I mean, we take my daughter to orthodontists across the border in Croatia because again, it's like it's a public-private place, so most of it's covered, but it's much quicker than waiting for stuff here. And everyone speaks fluent English, Italian, and Croatian there. So it's like, it's super easy. But like, I'm not sure how we found that place because it doesn't make sense. You're like, wait a sec, I'm gonna go to another country for my kid to get her braces and all that stuff. But it's like that in that case, it's like, well, I guess, I'm paying money into the system and somehow it's still covered in a different country because they're in the EU. So those are like little things you don't kind of know until you actually get there and start and talking with people, which is again why, like that kind of support network of expats is important. I was just thinking when you were talking like, okay, you want to live, if you lived in, let's say Sicily, Otto doesn't have any, he doesn't know anyone there. And I'm just wondering, like, I bet you there's probably some places where there's like not the Netherlands where there's like a big Dutch expat community, like in
That's one of the reasons we were looking at France, is apparently in the Dordogne, there's a really large Dutch community. And that's another thing to look at. Like, because I'm sure that's true also for Americans. And that's not a terrible thing. I know a lot of people say, oh, I'm moving to Spain because I want to be with Spanish people. If you go to Cascais in Portugal, everybody there is from Los Angeles or San Diego. I swear to you, I went out to lunch there and I didn't hear a single Portuguese speaker other than the server. But that's not bad. The reason that a lot of expats live in enclaves like that is because they help each other, because a lot of this is really hard. You did it the hard way.
you
Like,
did.
I don't know that I'm down with that, but you can do it the hard way. And you can, if you want to have that experience of truly being an outsider. But being an outsider when you travel is a really thrilling experience, but living it day to day is tiring. It's more tiring than you realize. Having been somebody who lived halfway between Europe and the US for most of my life, it's tiring, I think.
Yeah, no, well, I mean, I kind of lucked out because where we first moved, it was like, oh, there's a bunch of people there that all had kids the same age, and it was like they were friendly. But you can move to a kind of a small village like that where no one wants to talk to you because no one can because they don't speak any of your language, and you're not learning the local language for at least a few months. So, yeah, it is really it's really key to have those expat things or for example like yeah you might not meet someone somewhere who's an American but like Otto could be like, oh, I've got my Dutch radar on and I noticed that there's a bunch of Dutch people here and you're like, okay, that's great. I mean, Slovenia is not really a big hub for American expats, so I meet other expats. Like my best friend who lives in Koper, he's from Sweden. He's like, oh, he's like, I'm never gonna complain about anything. They've got wine and sunny weather, and he's like, I'm never leaving. And it's like, hey, great. It's like I'll hang out with the Swedish guy. That's fine too. They speak English. And my Swedish isn't so good, but yeah, there you go.
Yeah, but I mean, expats, like we said, that's a really good place to look for friends. So the health insurance we've covered, it's not. Let me just give you a comparison. My health insurance that I pay for an individual self-employed plan is $650 a month for just me only. As a comparison, I think in the Netherlands, if I was to live there, it's about $300 a month per person. So just to give you a comparison on that, it's a lot less expensive there. The place they get you though is the taxes. The taxes are much different. And can you just give us a quick idea about taxes? Because my understanding of it is when you live in Europe,
Mhm.
you file taxes in the country that you live in, you pay that local tax rate. You do have to file taxes still in the United States, but because you've already paid taxes, which are probably more in the country that you're living in, you don't pay anything, but you have to report to the US that you did in fact pay taxes.
So I know with some expats, and since everything, their business, everything, because my business always stayed in Seattle. So I was doing two things. I was paying taxes in Seattle to the IRS for that, but I have my own business here. Like I said, if you don't work for someone, you kind of have to be employed. That's the thing. It's like if you don't work for someone, then you need your own business if, for no other reason to pay for your insurance every month or whatever.
You set up your
Um,
business in Slovenia.
Yeah, so I have my own little kind of part. It's like a private corp business. I mean, you could have an LLC equivalent or whatever, but like in Slovenia, the bureaucracy is kind of a mess. But one thing that's nice is they offer this thing. It's kind of like if you've got a small business, and I think here now it's like if you gross 60,000 euros or less a year, everything's like, hey, 20%, 20, we count 20% of that gross as your profit, and we tax you 20% on that 20%. And really, there's like one form to fill out at the end of the year that my accountant fills out. So it's like the easiest thing to do if you can kind of have that kind of smaller business. And I'm guessing some countries might have this or some might not, but they kind of have like plans. And so it's like, okay, I'll take this option because it sounds easy and I don't have to have all this accounting paperwork and I pretty much know what my taxes are. But yeah, I mean, if I had the same LLC in Slovenia that I had in Seattle, I'd be paying a lot more in taxes over here. I mean, you get more, but I mean, you pay more for sure. I mean, and I think all that stuff is fairly easy to look on some of these expat indexes you can download, and it's like, hey, here's tax rates and cost of living and all that stuff. So you can have a look at it. But again, everything's not just, it's not like there's only one kind of business and one kind of tax. So you really want to talk to some other expats and see like, hey, what kind of business should I open and what's the easiest way for me to do it? Or what's the least amount of tax I could pay without, whatever, going to tax jail? Because
Yes.
they do have like the financial carbonieri, it's like they have the police for finances is like that's crazy.
No, they do. But so we are not tax experts in any way. And the whole taxation thing is a really big mess, honestly, in certain countries with respect to also still being an American citizen. The
Hmm.
US will always expect you to file your taxes. It doesn't matter where you live in the world or who you pay. As a business owner myself, my thought, and I can't, like I said, I'm no accountant or tax person, but my thought would be I keep my business still registered in the United States. My business exists and pays its taxes in the US. My salary I am receiving once I live in Europe, then whatever that salary is, that would be taxed by the locals. And that's the income tax I would report then to the US that I paid. Does that make sense? I think
Yeah.
that's how.
Yeah, if you don't need to open up a business over here, then that's good. And I think that's a little easier now, especially with some of the digital nomad visas and stuff like that, because they're expecting you to already have your own company or have some employer in the States paying you. And their question for digital nomad visas is like, hey, you need to make X amount of money per month. And their thing is like, hey, we're gonna get you, you're gonna put your money in the economy here, but you're going to deal with all the business stuff back in your home country rather than there. So,
And I think it's kind of the same if you're thinking about doing like a golden visa, one of these retirement visas, which actually a lot of countries are offering, especially I know in Italy, they're thinking about doing them for underserved populations. So populations they're trying to rejuvenate. They're offering better terms for retirees that want to move there to encourage repopulation of dying cities. So that's one way to look for a place if you are thinking about retiring. But typically retiree visas are going to require proof of income, so Social Security or investment income, how much you have, and also having X amount of money in a bank account in that country. So I know I've seen some European countries require something like a $50,000 deposit into a bank account in their country to show that you actually have the money to support yourself, so you're not moving there just to live off of the state. So there is, I don't know the ins and outs of all these, but I know they do exist. Have you heard anything about these retiree visas?
Well, I just know like I had a friend, an American friend, went to Greece, and right when he was buying property there, they were switching their thing from 250, like if you spend 250,000 euros or more on property, like you can get permanent residency, not a passport. And then they were upping it to 500,000 or whatever. And who knows what happens to the people who are like in the process when they do that. It's like I don't think you want to be in that because you're probably like the thing is, Sarah, the thing that's crazy is like you can ask 10 different people who do this stuff, like at the business place or the government place, and I think like you'll get like 10 different answers. And that's the thing that's kind of crazy. I think you have to have patience and sanity and always be kind of double checking things and asking any expat or forum group, is this correct? Because sometimes everyone who lives there is like telling you seven different things. So you don't really know exactly how straightforward it is. Let's say there's not a whole lot that's straightforward about any of that kind of process.
Yeah, so basically, this is not as easy as you think. It's not like I'm sure you watch videos on Instagram of people's like, look at my beautiful life in my Tuscan villa. Yeah, there's a lot more to it than that. So don't think you're just gonna waltz in and just be handed this lifestyle. So you need to work for it, which is hard. So just a couple of other topics we wanted to like quickly touch on. Cost of living, I think, is a really big question that people have, especially about living in Europe. Certain countries outside of Europe, like Thailand, you could easily live on $1,500 a month with no problem and be very comfortable. Europe is going to be a little bit more, but honestly, I would just say as long as you're not living in the center of Paris in on the Ile Saint-Louis, which is what I would like to do. As long as you're not looking for some fancy, expensive lifestyle, generally speaking, comparative to a place like Seattle, for example, San Francisco, Los Angeles, New York, all of these other places in the US, bigger cities or even mid-sized cities in the US, I think the overall cost of living is less. What do you think?
Yeah, it definitely is. Because I mean, I had something that'd be equivalent of what, 1,000 square feet, two-bedroom, high ceilings in the old town of a place, storage unit, nice kitchen, blah 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 blah, and that was the equivalent of like $900 a month. I mean, like, are you kidding me? Like, I couldn't probably rent a closet in Seattle for 900. But okay, food prices have kind of gone up everywhere. Both groceries and dining out, certainly since the end of the pandemic. But I think the key thing is, and this is why I think it can really be affordable, is hey, and this is why you want to make sure when you have a conversation with local people, you take this into consideration. You're like, wow, your city's so cheap. Like, don't ever say that, because if you're making the local wage, then the cost of living is probably just like Seattle is. So that's the trick. If you're an American and you've got your retirement money or your nest egg money or your company there or your employer there and you're on a digital nomad visa, if you're getting paid American salary and your living expenses are, for the general population of Slovenia or Portugal or wherever, then you're in a really nice spot. And that is the greatest advantage, I think, of doing this, is like, wow, if I could survive an expensive city like Seattle and keep that salary or keep whatever that income was coming, that goes a lot further over here. Because I think in general, like the average wage here, not just Slovenia, but Europe in general, is a lot lower than the US. And it's not so easy for the family of four to survive here because they're making a lot less. But when you move here with your income, that's it's like, oh, I think I'll take a few extra trips this year. I mean, it is that is the big advantage, I think, Sarah, of being an expat over here.
Yeah, yeah, the cost of living can be quite a lot less. And just as sort of a no a point of data, I was recently in a grocery store in the Netherlands, and a big carton of strawberries was like €2. And I just went to the local grocery store and they were $8 for the exact same ones. And this was a cheap grocery store. It wasn't even like an organic co-op. So
And the strawberries there probably tasted better than they did here in
yeah, I
Seattle.
mean, groceries in general are significantly less expensive. I have found in every single country, and certain countries are more expensive than others. You know, I would say Scandinavia is expensive. Netherlands is kind of expensive. Germany is surprisingly cheap, actually. Germany is not very expensive. France is surprisingly affordable. Italy is affordable, but not as affordable as it should be comparatively. Greece is pretty affordable. Slovenia is very, very affordable, I think, right?
Yeah, I mean, with when you're looking at rental places and dining out, I mean, I mean, for me, it was like when I went back a couple years ago and I was like, a teriyaki bowl and a Coke is $25. It's like, well, I mean, like I get a wine tasting with a really nice snack platter for less than that. Like, what is the deal? And as we've already talked about, if whatever you have as far as transport goes, you're probably not going to be spending the amount of money you do on renting some SUV, because if you're going to get something over here, you want something nice and small to fit into the streets and the small parking spots. Is you're gonna save on that right away, so that you don't have to come here, you know with a ton of money. You just need to have that kind of, I'd say, nest egg or backup money, because who knows how soon you'll be working, or how long it'll take you to figure out, where you actually want to rent or buy or whatever. But in general, like, yeah, it is really, there's a lot of bargains here, I
So
think, compared
then,
to the States.
I think the last question I wanted to ask you is, what do you miss about the US? What are the things that teriyaki, I know that's one.
Yeah, I know. I was like, I don't know. It's like, can anyone just open up a teriyaki stand? Like, okay. But it's funny because like when I moved here like 12 years ago, all that stuff didn't exist here. Like the craft beer scene wasn't here yet. All this stuff that you're like, it was like, yeah, there's like one bad Chinese restaurant or whatever. Food stuff is kind of, everywhere in Europe. Like there's craft everything, and there's people moving here from everywhere in the world. You can get all sorts of different type of food. Um, yeah, I there's a lot of it's easier for me to say here's the stuff I don't miss. I guess the thing is, maybe,
What don't you miss?
what don't you miss? I would say I don't miss the 24/7 news cycle. Like that's like, and I know you could just like turn off the TV, but no one does. And that's like one thing. I think even if I was fluent in Slovenia, no one here is in that watching the news cycle like they are in the US, and that's been quite some time. Sometimes it's annoying over here, but I think it's the whole kind of like balance of work and like, let's have fun, let's not always be thinking about work. Sometimes you would like it if some of your colleagues were like, can you think about work a little bit more so we can get this done? But on the other hand, people can take more time to appreciate things. And safety, I mean, having little kids was one of those things, was like, people are like, what, your daughter's in third grade and she bikes to school, and then she stays afterwards and goes somewhere else, and you pick her up at 9 at night. I'd be like, yeah, I'd be crucified in Seattle if I did that as a parent. But over here, it's like, okay, it is really safe. And it doesn't have to be Slovenia. Slovenia is really safe. You can be in Italy. You could be at most places in Europe, and it is really safe. Those are things you could just get used to. I think you just get used. The lifestyle is different. But the thing that I miss, I guess the thing I miss the most is just, yeah, I can't just call up like 12 friends and go out and hang out. I mean, it's like all that is gone. You're hoping you'll see your friends again or they'll come visit. But that kind of, like, I think when you leave that place, that was your home, you're never recreating it over here. You're traded in for something different, and the pros outweigh the cons easily for me. So I try not to think too much about it. But that's just, it's just,
Yeah.
hey, there's an ocean apart, and like, it's just like your life's going to change if wherever you move to. It can't be the same.
I would say my biggest pro and con, having lived back and forth throughout my life, is the biggest con is the food. Because I find that most countries eat their food. You know, most countries have a food that they love. I love Greece, but I would like die if I had to live in Greece eating souvlaki and Greek salad every day. You know, every country has their food. I love French food, but like after a while, I get really tired of it because as an American, I'm so used to having anything I want, especially in Seattle. We're such a multicultural city. I can have Vietnamese tomorrow, and then I can have teriyaki, and then I can go for Chinese, and then I can go for Indian. Like every single day of the week, I can have a different ethnicity, a different kind of food. And we have so many options, but above all, tortillas. Tortillas
Oh,
soul food. I mean, I'm from LA. I'm like kind of like spiritually Mexican, and it kills me to be in countries without the ingredients to make good salsa, avocado, cilantro, all those things. You can find that stuff more and more. But for me, that has been one of the biggest barriers is like, I cannot make, I know that sounds very stupid, but if you are in Italy for 6 months, I have been in Italy for 6 months in a row before, and I'm so tired of pasta. I can't stand it. I don't want to look at it again because as Americans, we're trained appreciate all this variety that we have of food. So that's,
yeah, yeah. Then it's a great thing to look for a place that's cosmopolitan because there's not so many cosmopolitan. I was just in Dubai, and Dubai was like, oh yeah, every day I could eat something different here. But like it's like it's let's face it, it's the immigrants. Like if you don't have these immigrants bringing their food and everything else, it's gonna be same. And I don't care how great Italian or Greek or Slovenian food is. You're like, yeah, I really want something different. Thank you.
yeah, because we're just lucky to have that. So for me, that's the biggest
Yeah.
con. And I know that
Yeah.
sounds very stupid, but it actually does wear on you as an American over
Yeah.
time. It really gets irritating. But on the other hand, the biggest benefit, in my view, it has nothing to do even with cost of living or health insurance or whatever. As a woman, it's the ambient stress of threat. I do not feel the ambient, threat every single day. I just noticed that we were in the Netherlands for a couple of weeks this summer. I could go out and walk down the street at 9 o'clock at night, and I didn't even think for a second about somebody jumping out of a tree to murder me. And I think about that all the time without thinking about it. It just is like a noise in the back of your head as a woman. I don't like going to my mailbox after dark. I don't. I have to go and pick up one of my kids at 10 o'clock once a week. I hate it because I'm like, ugh, and I stand on my porch and I click on the lights in my car, and then I open my car door and I look around the back seat of my car to make sure nobody's in my car. I've been trained to do that. I used to carry mace when I was a teenager because there was a girl killed in the parking lot by a stranger of my high school. Like I've grown up with this ambient sense of threat that just it wears you down. And I've noticed being in Europe, I don't feel that. I don't feel threatened. I don't walk down the street thinking somebody's gonna kidnap me or murder me. I don't. Is there crime in Europe? Sure, of course there is, but it's much more common that you're going to be pickpocketed or something like that. I mean, what about Slovenia? Is there much crime in Slovenia?
No, I mean the violent crime rate is, well, I don't know what it is, but it is so low. I mean, like here we don't have to go and everything. Like, you know what it is in the US. Like there's mass shootings and there's everything. Here, like the biggest thing would be like some guy finally snapped and like murder suicide who lived in a village and the guy drank a lot. That'd be like, oh my God, I can't believe that happened. Like that's the thing that like happens twice a year or something like that. Some little village, the guy's like, yep, I'm killing myself and my wife. And really that's it because guests, wife, kids, wherever, midnight, city center, not the city center, the park, wherever, you're not worrying about any of that stuff. And I think what I know is people here ask me, like they just take it for granted. They don't know really because they haven't lived in, like, let's say big city America or maybe kind of any city America. And it's like, yeah, you don't know until you go there and you live there, and then you realize, oh, it's such a relief not to worry about it. I guess I don't have the same issue that you would, but I had to worry about my kids in the US, and here it was like you just don't have to, and that takes out, I mean, that makes everything just easier because there's all that stuff is gone. The random weird crap just doesn't really happen here. And
Yeah, to me, I think that's one of the greatest benefits beyond all. I mean, aside from the enrichment of your life, like I will also say that the best thing I've ever done for myself in my life was to become a part of another country. You know, I speak Italian fluently. I know the history. I have lots of friends. It feels like home to me. And for me, that's enriched me as a person, and it challenges me every single day. I love being in Italy because every day I run up, and you'll never master it, by the way, no matter what culture you move to, and it doesn't matter if you're a teenager, you will be learning your whole life, which for some people, that's not great. It's not great being challenged every single day, like just on your belief system or the way you think things should be. I mean, Americans, we're very impatient. We want things now. You know, we don't want to sit and wait an hour to get our food. We think that's terrible. But in Europe, they do that because they think you should be chatting with your friends or whatever. So it's like you are challenged every day, whether that's language, food, culture, everything. And that can be really hard for certain personalities. And it's definitely not for you if you're not completely prepared to fit into whatever box they give you, because these countries are not going to make room for you. You know what I
yeah,
mean?
they're not going to be like, oh, well, we'll just adopt what you're used to here. I mean, it was the simplest thing when I moved here was like, what? I can't make a right turn on a red light. Are you sure about that? I was like, okay, I guess like, okay, I guess I'll adapt or whatever. And you just, there's like little things. And sometimes I even wonder, is this like the way it is over here? Or am I, or is it really that different what I'm used to? Or am I just like growing old and impatient? I don't know. Or maybe it's like a combination of things. But at the same time, you're like, oh, there's so many things that you don't have seemingly don't have to worry about as much here. And again, it's really not for everyone. I mean, put it this way, if you travel to Europe and it's kind of difficult, whether it's a physical thing or mental thing, or I can't get used to things not being the same way they are in the States, like you probably should not relocate. Um,
Yeah.
uh, but I like, to me, it's like even if it doesn't work out, or even if it's for a year or two, it's like it is like traveling, but it's not like traveling. It's like has the travel component, but it's totally different. And I think it's an experience that if you can if at least have the gumption to try it for a little bit, it's worth it because it will change your perspective. If I had to move back to the US tomorrow, I'd be like, my time in living in Europe totally changed me a lot more than almost anything I could think of. So that's why I would say go for it. If what you hear doesn't scare the crap out of you, then like come on over.
We can be even scarier if we want to. I've got
Yeah,
lots
it's
of.
like we were holding back. You don't need to know that until you move here.
Yeah, no, I mean, but I think it's really good to be realistic. But I think at the end of the day, the way being a part of another culture has expanded me and made me a better person and made me less judgmental and more patient and more empathetic and more just, I literally have been forced in my lifetime to see things the way an Italian sees it, because otherwise I'd have drowned years ago. But I've been forced to look at life the way Italians look, because so many times things don't make any sense. And you're like, why are you like this? And then you go, okay, wait a second. Their culture, their history, their time, everything about them, the way they interact with their families and things like that. Oh, that's why they're making these choices that you would never make. And then you start going, well, wait a second. Maybe I'm the one who's not doing things the way that's best. I mean, it makes you question your own upbringing, your own values. And then you get to this really cool place that I feel like I've arrived, which is you blend the best of all of both
Yeah.
cultures.
Yeah,
You know,
you
you
just like, here's what I like from growing up in America. Here's what I like from this and this and this. It's like the blend is like that's the best way. You like take the best out and hopefully you leave the worst parts, on the side or whatever.
Yeah, and I think that's a beautiful way to be a person who can kind of just find the best of all the worlds. It's just the tortillas, man. That's the only non-negotiable.
I'll tell you, Sarah, if I could just get some family from Mexico, from anywhere, just like come here, open the taco shop, keep it open to 3 in the AM. You'll make money from all the students. It's like it's win-win. I'll be happy, everyone will be happy.
Somebody
Yeah.
please open a Mexican restaurant in Europe somewhere, please. I beg. Well, I think we're going to leave it here for now, but I would like to invite all of you that have watched this very long live stream all the way to the end. I want to invite you guys to please ask us questions in this post. If you're watching this on YouTube, if you're watching this on Facebook, put comments, because what we'd like to do is we'd like to continue this conversation. So if you have specific questions that you didn't get answered today or that have piqued your interest, let us know, because we're interested in having more conversations. Andrew and I have a lot of friends in different countries too. So if you would like to
Mhm.
have a conversation about a specific country, the pros and cons of moving to Italy or Spain or France, we certainly can have roundtables or more conversations about this, because I think this is something everybody's really curious about right now. So I would say at the end of the day, the point is moving to Europe, it's not for everyone. What do you think?
Oh yes, it's definitely it's not for everyone. But if you think it's for you, I'd almost say you gotta try it out. I mean, you know, life's too short not to give this a try, and it will positively impact you, regardless of all the what you have to worry about or how everything's going to turn out. You got to do it.
Cool. All right. Well, thanks for joining us for this coffee chat. Hopefully, we're going to be doing more of them coming up real soon. And as always, thanks for supporting our renegade little business. Andrew and I have been in business, what, 10 years now almost?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a crazy, crazy voyage we've been on. So thank you for joining us. And we will talk to you again soon. So thanks so much, Andrew.
All right. Thanks, Sarah. Bye, everyone.